All right. So 2 weeks ago, I preached on the European part of our Unitarian history, which really didn't impact our U.S.-American history much until the 1990s. But since that time, it has helped us grow in ways that would have been otherwise perhaps unlikely. Within the narrative of our very cool Unitarian history in Transylvania, Unitarianism does exist in other parts of Europe, especially Poland and England. Within that is the way that Unitarianism emerged there. Rejecting Trinitarianism for theological but also relational reasons was central in their identity formation. Specifically, Unitarians found Trinitarianism objectionable because it needlessly separated Christianity from the other Abrahamic traditions, their and our faith siblings, Judaism and Islam. All this began in the 1500s and has remained part of their religious identity all these generations, despite persecution. American Unitarianism took a different route, informed by completely different circumstances. To some degree, thinkers and religious people were informed by English Unitarianism, but Unitarianism was also a homegrown shift in thinking about religion and its application to life and the world here and now, as well as in the hereafter. I'll be drawing a bit from A Stream of Light, a short history of American Unitarianism, edited by Conrad Wright. But before we get into the Unitarian part of the history, I want to remind everyone that our polity and the basis of our faith covenant comes from our way back heritage that goes straight back to the Puritans and Pilgrims. When they came to this land, although they were clear that they disagreed with various theologies in Europe, they didn't all share the same beliefs. In an effort to figure out how they might be together, they spent years having house meetings and conversations that eventually brought into being the Cambridge Platform of 1648. Among them, they agreed to be in covenant with one another. Each congregation was allowed to self-govern, and how this would be set up was established in the platform, including the election of officers from within the congregation. This form of governance became known as Congregationalist. Our faith comes from this tradition, as does the United Church of Christ and the Congregationalists. Fast forward more than a century, and as with our Universalist heritage, Unitarian theology began to gain traction before it was institutionalized. With the Unitarians, this happened more slowly than for the Universalists, in part likely because the Unitarians were extracting themselves from an existing church structure. I think the idea of becoming Unitarian in an ocean of Trinitarians was far more challenging than contemplating God's unending love for us. American Unitarianism was shaped by men like Charles Chauncey and Jonathan Mayhew in the 18th century, who began questioning Calvinist doctrines of original sin and eternal punishment. This evolved over a couple of generations into simply not preaching on the Trinity at all among some preachers. And as you might guess, there's some inkling of universalism with a small u in there too. The two halves of our Christian heritage have always danced with and been around each other. Liberalism was growing during this time frame, and this shift became clear when the Reverend Henry Ward was elected to the oldest endowed chair position. It was old and then. The Hollis Professorship of Divinity at Harvard College in 1805, following a lot of contention. This moment is considered by some as the beginning of what has come to be known as the Unitarian controversy. We have always been a controversial people. These ministers and others who supported engaging with biblical commentary and criticism as an important aspect of the ministerial training, a novel idea, I guess, experienced shunning and ridicule as well as name-calling. Accused of being unchristian due to their non-Trinitarian beliefs, in 1815, William Ellery Channing attempted to soothe the more conservative religious academics, but to no avail. In fact, trenches were dug deeper. So this was the context for the ordination sermon of 1819 that marked the official launch of the Unitarians. A Unitarian church had been gathered and dedicated in Baltimore in 1818. They were calling a new graduate, Jared Sparks, to their pulpit, and as Channing had been his mentor, he was offered to give the sermon. It was entitled Unitarian Christianity and has been referred to as the most famous sermon ever delivered in America. I assume the author is perhaps a little bit biased. Channing proclaimed in this sermon that the scriptural basis of the unity of God, followed by the unity of Christ, that is, that Jesus is distinguished from God in the scriptures. He argued for the moral perfection of God, that their goodness is infinite, that their justice and mercy make blasphemous the doctrine of human depravity and the perversion of the will and eternal damnation. Channing argued that Christ was sent to be our Savior, a moral example to reconcile us to God. Last, he declared that the nature of true holiness can be seen in one's love to God, love to Christ, and love toward one another. In 90 minutes, you're welcome, Channing laid out the principles that informed his and others' Unitarian theology. Unitarianism shifted from being a pejorative term to one that was used with pride. Within the year, about a third of formerly Congregationalist churches in Boston became Unitarian, and most of the men in positions of power, especially professors, judges, literary men, and more, were Unitarian. With a sudden rising number of Unitarian churches, clergy were aware that they needed some kind of organization. In 1820, the Berry Street Conference came to be, the same one that we continue to hold every year. Its purpose was and is to bring together clergy to talk about matters of current importance. The Constitution of the American Unitarian Association was adopted in 1825, formally separating the Unitarians from the Congregationalists. In the years before the Civil War, the newly formed Unitarians struggled with two matters: the question of slavery on the justice side and the question of religion's purpose on the spiritual and academic side. In the 1830s and 40s, people like Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Theodore Parker, and Margaret Fuller emerged as important voices in the literary and intellectual history. They were among the Transcendentalists. Emerson described their role this way: there are always two parties, the party of the past and the party of the future, the establishment and the movement. Transcendentalists identified as the movement here. They were what we might call pantheists today, or among religious naturalists, who saw and felt God everywhere in creation and themselves. They extensively read Hindu mysticism, as well as European romantics like Goethe and Coleridge. There they found a love of nature that resonated, but also a sense of passion. In 1838, Emerson, who had resigned from Unitarianism in 1832, gave his famous Harvard Divinity School address to the graduating class. He protested Unitarian beliefs in what he called supernatural rationalism, arguing that God can easily be found and experienced in nature. Basically, he encouraged people to go out into nature to get right with God and the world, and trusted that that would help us navigate our relationships with each other as neighbors, and that was all we needed. In 1841, Parker then delivered his famous sermon. There are a lot of famous sermons at this time. The Transient and the Permanent in Christianity, which offered his proclamation of transcendentalist principles. This was also an ordination sermon. In the category of transient were creeds, confessions, and all doctrine, as well as the whole of the scriptures, and even the personal authority of Christ. The permanent, he argued, was pure morality, or what was called reason among the transcendentalists. He caused a lot of distress for the fairly young denomination, as his views greatly upset clergy and other more conservative traditions and caused Unitarians to wonder what the boundaries of belief were for their ministers. The distress was made worse by Parker's insistence that he was not going to resign his position. He continued to share his ideas and attract younger, newer clergy with his beliefs. Some people and ministers did leave Unitarianism over the transcendentalist controversy, but most did not. Unitarianism then began to spread outside of New England, even all the way west through the work of Thomas Starr King. In 1865, the National Conference of Unitarian Churches was established, and Unitarianism became a structured denomination for the first time. Fast forward again, and the first Humanist Manifesto was published in 1933. It included among its 34 signing ministers many Unitarians and at least one Universalist. Given our Unitarian history as I've laid out so far, this isn't a surprising trajectory of belief, especially as we consider both what was going on in the world at that time and what the world had experienced in the generation leading up to it. Some humanists were called to leave Unitarianism to form the American Humanist Association, but others, like Parker, did 3 generations before, stayed. They pushed the boundaries of belief of our faith, making it again a little bit bigger and a little more flexible. There is overlap in belief still among the humanists and Unitarian Universalists. And once that door to other non-Christian identities was cracked open, of course it opened as wide as possible. Accepting of various beliefs and not requiring a statement of belief or confession as is standard in Christian churches made our Unitarian Universalist congregations a welcoming space for people of a variety of other backgrounds, including Jewish, and growing now to hold people who are Muslim, pagan, atheist, Buddhist, Hindu, and many others. We have also become a welcoming religious space for those who are in interreligious marriages and those who may be or may not be in interreligious marriages or partnerships, but still want their children to appreciate people of a variety of religious traditions and other identities. Add in then our partner church program, which led to exchange between American and Transylvanian Unitarian churches at first, and then other international churches, and our history is a rich one of pluralism, as we embody in our congregations far more of a theological spectrum than any other religion. For a long time, we had the 6 sources as a cornerstone of how our experiences and faith had been shaped. In the last few years, we have begun considering how else our faith, our living tradition, our seeming shape-shifting theology, restless for greater inclusion and widening the scope of curiosity and wonder, how it might be grounded and talked about in a way that more accurately holds all of us while also carrying us forward. Covenant has always been for this possibility. A group charged by the UUA board wondered about our possibilities in understanding who we have become and who we yet hope to be. Their proposal emerged to make love the center with equal values radiating from it and interconnected with it. The final formal proposal, now written in the UUA bylaws, came forward with 6 values, whose acronym can be JETPIG: justice, equity, transformation, pluralism, interdependence, and generosity. Ours is a living tradition. James Luther Adams famously wrote that revelation is continuous, and those words resonate for us deeply 3 generations later. As seeking people who ask hard and deep questions, we have never stopped growing and changing. And every time we do grow and change, when we are shaped by trends and answering our heart's own calls, we pause and reflect on who we are, who we have become, and who we still want to be. Where do we want to go? What of the past is important for us to carry forward, and what might be better left behind? And every time, sometimes a few people choose to leave. And every time, people also find their way to us, find their way into our faith by knowing and feeling included. Unitarians were shook by the Transcendentalists, and it raised these questions of identity for our ancestors. They once claimed a clear call for God and Jesus as exemplar, one who would show us the way, but now, what now? How can we think that even time alone and living our lives hasn't changed the way we think about things? I certainly hope that we've grown from our beliefs, as most recently updated in Article 2's 7 Principles from 1987. I know we have, for no other reason than in the last decade plus, an 8th principle has been proposed for consideration, which more than a fifth of our congregations adopted. The new Article 2 revisions help us frame a different understanding of our beliefs and the boundaries of how we want to be in covenant with one another. They name what we value and how and why. And I really appreciate how these are values personally. The question of beliefs has been a complicated one for UUs for some time, but values feels like something that we can all get behind. It's what I've used as a way to explain Unitarian Universalism to our children and youth and their educators in different congregations about what's important to share about our faith. Beliefs come with a lot of, it depends, whereas values come with clearer statements. Along with the question of adding an 8th principle and then reviewing all the principles was a question about our 6 sources, which had left out some fairly large religions that are important to our faith, particularly Islam and Buddhism. But even in their naming, there's no accounting for every religion a person may have left or still be holding when they come in our doors. Taking that question and just naming that we value pluralism, whatever shape it takes in a particular congregation or area, and UUism as a whole, it affirms our respect and appreciation for all of who we are and all the ways we as individuals and as communities can be shaped. We have, as a faith, embraced how we have grown and learned from other religions and practices, and we have been enriched because of this. Each of us who identifies as UU or attends our congregations is held each week by our heritage of seeking and welcoming in. We appreciate those who have challenged us to reach a little more, honored our multitudes, and call this faith, these people, this tradition our own. Our covenants remind us that we don't need to agree on everything so long as we make our way in conversation together. Our chalice flame reminds us that we are meant to gather as we recognize the joys and sorrows and everything else that comes with our living, and it grounds us as we find our own ways in the world, using whatever theologies and practices, as well as truth, beauty, and wisdom to bring us comfort and meaning. The legacy of our ancestors is that we may find in our togetherness healing and belonging and awareness that we are all held in love always. I think, for time's sake, that we should go ahead and skip to weave. Should we go ahead and skip to weave? Yeah, let's go ahead and skip to weave. Skip the closing hymn. Please, thank you.
Do you want to do the chalice extinguishing?
Yes.
No.
Okay.
We'll do that.
You do that. Okay. I'll get it. Whoops. Sorry.
That's okay.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.